Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, a discussion of the work of Stan Tenen, an ongoing discussion. We're now on episode 20. And before we get started, let's meet our almost usual cast of characters: Levana Tenen, Daniel Gill, and Adele Packer. Glad to see you back. And unfortunately, we don't have Michael Andron with us this week, but we'll plug ahead without him. So today we're going to continue what we began last episode in terms of discussing something that was extremely important to Stan, understanding the meanings of the Hebrew alphabet. Because without knowing those meanings, everything else is does not have any essence or importance, because the hand gestures, just the relationships, the universal language is all based on understanding the meanings. And so what we did last time is we looked at a very early discussion of a matrix that Stan put together. And by the way, I did want to mention before, and I haven't said this before, but these discussions that we're having are not rehearsed. I just want you to know that we are all just taking up the subject. It's like going in and things are just evolved, which I think makes it really fresh and rewarding, especially looking at the past episodes where, one little topic took up, over an hour of discussion. And so the thing is that we do have differences and we have things in common, and that I think adds to the quality of these discussions. So let me go ahead and put up, let's just go into it. And if you saw the last episode, you'll see some things that we that are familiar that we showed last time. So this is the result of the organization that Stan put together in terms of putting the alphabet in a form in which it makes logical sense in terms of understanding the meanings, how the meanings developed. And we talked about last week, Levana got it into more detail about these three levels, in terms of the first top level being the archetypical, I guess is the term, and the middle row being the inner spiritual level, and the third row being the outer physical. So we're not just looking at the progression, the linear progression of the alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled. We're actually looking at the vertical elements, the Aleph, Yud, and Kaf, which we discussed last time. Today we're going to look at the second row over, the Beit, Kuf, and Resh, and especially spend time talking about Beit. Beit is extremely important. If you take away anything from this work, it's understanding the element of Beit, the meaning of Beit, and how it fits into almost everything in our existence. And this was extremely important to Stan. So we're going to spend some time on it. So let's start by showing the video from 1990 that we showed last time. When we're done with this, I'll show you this poster in a better quality. But let's go ahead and see what Stan has to say about this.
If this is Aleph, Yud, and Kuf, the next letters in each level are Beit, Kaf, and Resh. All right? This is a light. This is all extinct existence. This is a connected, flowing force, the great force of life coming down the chain of being, generation on generation. The light of the universe. This has got to be a distinction. In fact, it's the first distinction. It is the primary distinction. It is the distinction par excellence, the primal form of analysis. The distinction between, if you look over here, between inside and outside, and the Hebrew name of this second letter of the alphabet is Beit, pronounced B or V, usually. It means a house, a vessel, a container. And as a prefix, it means in or into or in it or within or with. The archetypal sense of the distinction between inside and outside, spelled and named in Hebrew, Beit. If we come over to the English side, we find the cognate to Beit is booth. It's a little house. Or with. The double V that makes the W is in fact the same as the letter B in Hebrew. The I is the Yud, and the T or TH is the Tav at the end of the name of the letter. And both, because Beit also means two or duality, as the numerologist and Kabbalist normally would claim. In modern usage, and again, this obvious, and here's a perfect example of why this cannot be due to phonetic drift. The most obvious example of a direct cognate meaning to the Hebrew letter Beit is our modern computer term bit or byte, the least distinction. Obviously, those terms didn't exist in the ancient world. Therefore, this is not a linguistic problem, although obviously the mathematicians or the computer scientists named those things bit or byte because they thought of them as the smallest little nibble of information. You want to have a comment to this? We have a computer person.
The term bit came from binary digit, and byte was simply a collection of, actually it was bits, bytes, gulps, and swallows for a while back in the 60s, due to IBM naming the path widths of their computers. But the original term bit came from binary digit, and I believe it was Claude Shannon.
Binary digit would be, oh, I see the first and last letters. Okay.
Right.
My theory is going to be, as we'll state at the end, that it's stabilized in that terminology because that was a naturally correct term based on this alternate theory of phonetic development.
Right.
And that we'll get to at the end. But what I'm saying is explicitly here, as my friend just pointed out, this is not due to anybody's analysis of the Hebrew letter B. This had a totally outside reason for being called a bit. Nevertheless, this is an acausal, I don't even think it's a synchronicity. I think there is a kind of connectedness here, which we'll talk about later in terms of brain function. But let's go on. Bit, byte, box is a minimal house or a booth. But, one or the other, in or out, are you in or out? Bat, boot, between, to, bifurcation, the idea of the bifurcation between in and out. Okay.
Yeah, as time wore on, he spoke less and less explicitly about the idea of words and neurological resonance, but that doesn't mean that he dropped the idea. It was very much a part of his thinking, and in the ensuing decades, I believe that there may be some research published that would support that kind of idea. Yeah, there has been.
What kind of idea?
That there are neurological brain function reasons why certain sounds get focused in on for certain kinds of meanings. And that's, it's a controversial idea in linguistics, but it was something, the whole idea that of the translingual puns, so-called, which is what we called this the same thing as what he called cognates in this video. He still thought in those terms, but it's not an easy sell still.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I've always felt that if, for example, with hand gestures, we're looking at
mhm,
a universal language,
mhm,
then there needs to be more than one definition of a word appropriate to whatever the dialogue is, so that if people know the different definitions or they feel them or it's instinctive, then there's a basis for communication with hand gestures for people who don't understand their common language. So to me, that was an important element of looking at all these letters and finding, more than one definition. Um,
in some
and
ways,
it is
I can't improve on Stanley's exposition there of the basis of the importance of bet, and um, and how he was exploring the letters. I'll tell our viewers that I have not seen this video in decades,
nor have
and it because it was so early
I.
in the work that we were doing.
And it was
Um,
sitting in my closet for about 20 years. So,
yeah, and it's not one that we ever released.
right.
Um, and so that's it's interesting to me just how clear and cogent and totally related to his later work um, his exposition was, and
So
because
later,
he actually
later, yeah.
demonstrated
And
on it.
later that year, he did the presentation at Arthur Young's called The Matrix of Meaning. And he had that same poster, but he didn't go in as much detail in terms of the letters, because obviously there was a lot to talk about that night.
And also this particular audience was it was a small audience. I think there were maybe
30.
three or four people. I
Oh,
mean, that's
at Arthur
that's
Young's?
all.
At
Hmm?
Arthur Young's.
No,
At-
no. The video that we just
That you
saw
oh,
just
yeah.
saw,
It was
yeah.
was
just
then was
myself and another person. Yeah. And you
yeah,
might have been there.
yeah. I think it was like three or four people,
Right.
and they were all experts in various different fields. So he went into a lot more individual detail in that presentation.
And I think Stan also wanted to get it on the record. I mean, I think that
Yes,
was really important
yeah, it
for
was
him
very
to,
important to him at that.
so there were a lot of videos done that were never released, that, where he got into, and especially where it was more complex. There's one called A Coat of Many Colors, where it's highly technical. I have a hard time following it, but we should probably get it out there also because somebody might get it. Adele, you had a point?
Yeah, he uses the word prefix, but I just want for our audiences to understand in Hebrew, if you put a bet, kind of like a bet and an apostrophe, it gives meaning the way what we would call a preposition. So it's with or within something. That bet goes in front of the word, even if we said, with peace, b'shalom, or with love, ba'ahava. It's like it's a prefix in Hebrew, but in English, it's called a preposition.
Yeah.
And I just am amazed at, as you look at the meaning of the letters, that the depth of the letters, it all correlates, it all matches, that even this little meaning of a preposition before a word opens up the word in a just a magnificent way. I mean,
Right.
just thinking about within, in, the whole idea of in versus out. I'm in, I'm with you, I'm not separate from you. So all of those things are in the beauty of the Hebrew language. And probably Daniel can speak more to it. I am just learning this Hebrew language, but I think it's important that what he calls a prefix is a preposition.
In a couple of minutes, we'll look at the hand gesture for bait, because I think that's also, but yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, this is astounding. This poster, it seems like there's a lot there that didn't change, but could be even somehow this is more explicit in a lot of ways. And what's amazing to me is that, again, I'm still kind of just tripping out on the poster, and Stan had no idea about Chef Fatal at this point. What year is this video from?
1990.
1990. Okay. All right. It says the bottom. Okay. I mean, we hadn't met for a while. It was going to be over at least 10 years till we met. And then after that, until we got to the Chef Fatal, and I noticed the connections there, which is also a crazy story. It goes back to this crazy story. There was a snowstorm in Jerusalem and I needed a ride. And so I got a number from a friend. And then I had never met him before. And so he took me, I had to go change a flight. I was touring in the United States. And I didn't even know him from Drop a Habit. Somebody gave him, oh, he might, maybe he could help you. So I call him up and he says, yeah, I'll take you to Jerusalem. I had to go to the Lufthansa office because I was whatever. And it was a snowstorm. And he says, while we're driving back, he says, hey, take a look at this. Anyway, we became since very fast friends. He's a poet, lives in Jerusalem, one of my dear friends. But he hands me this book, and it's Chef Fatal, and I start looking at it. And I go, wow, man, this is that must have been 1998, 99. And I start looking at this, and I'm like, wow, this is like amazing, And so I think he lent me the copy, or I got another copy or something. And so then, it's just wild, because then you fast forward years later, and then I found all these connections with direct connections with Stan's work. And it's like this, just the chain of events that I happened to get a number from someone who I became fast friends with, who had a copy of Chef Fatal while driving me to the airport, and then I meet the tenants when I come to share. It's, you know what I mean? It's over the top. Anyway, sorry, personal story, but it's interesting. But what's amazing about this is this is so in line with Chef Fatal. I mean, you don't have to you barely have to change a thing but not and I never noticed it before. The Chef Fatal lays out the Sfirot according to the not 10 Sfirot, but 9 stuff. But he lays out the Sphirotic system, often called the Tree of Life, in a way where the top Sphira, so to speak, the crown, although again the Chef Fatal would probably reject anything which isn't equinimical between Sphirot. That's a whole nother topic. But for purposes of today, Keter as the top Sphira, the source of emanation, is always hidden, because the Malchut of the previous system, the bottom of the previous system, right, which is the sphere of Malchut, of kingdom, or control, really, mastery, is always the top of the following system that's beneath it. So when you reach the top of something, if you're climbing up, you've reached the bottom of the next level, right? And if you ever reach the bottom, then you've probably reached the top of something beneath you, right? So wherever you are whether you're an angel going up, or sometimes us angels are going down, you can always access some sort of knowledge or something. But I never saw it before. He is intuitively laying out the system of language in Chef Fatal according to the Sphirot, but he's elucidating what it means. I mean, again, just looking at this, it's I've learning Chef Fatal and whatever, and studying this stuff for a number of years, this is unbelievable just in terms of Kabbalah. This is intuitive knowledge with Stan. He came to this, he thought about this. And so just, again, there's this, all of a sudden I'm seeing, again, this deep connection to Chef Fatal. And if I could be bold as to say, if the great master who wrote Chef Fatal was alive, or wherever his soul is, I'm sure he would not only approve, but be wow. This is an explanation of his system, and I don't know how else to look at it, and I just never saw how explicit the way he lays that out is.
Yeah, a meeting with
So
the rabbi who
cool.
wrote Chef Fatal and Aryeh Kaplan and Stan.
I mean, perhaps it's happenings in some other dimension.
It probably is. Daniel, you've talked about Chef Fatal a lot over the series, and I always put up the book and have to explain that it's only been written in Hebrew. There's no English translation. But I'm so happy that you've been able to talk about this, because Stan, said many times that, this information came up through the generations, went through different periods, the golden age of Judaism in Spain, things like that, and said it was pretty much snuffed out during the Holocaust.
Yep.
But he didn't give any examples. He said mostly Eastern Europe. But what you've been able to show us in many of these episodes is, yes, this was studied in Eastern Europe. And
Yeah.
that, you know, we're talking about perhaps all the way up to the end of the 19th century and early 20th century.
Yep.
So it's not something that was buried. You know, obviously the people in Eastern Europe who studied this didn't broadcast it. There was no way of spreading it around. You know, and we don't know who the people are that studied it, but they are obviously, you know, wiped out. So that started the mid 20th century with no connection to this whatsoever.
Yep.
Feasible connection. And that's what you're
Yep.
saying about Stan's ability to redact this is what's so incredible, that he came along in the 1960s and started doing that. He was the person to do it.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, as I always say, and this was one of the most often reprinted books in Eastern Europe. So this was like, and there's you know, the Balatanya took a lot from this book, let's just say.
Who's that?
Like the Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Lubavitch, the founder of Chabad Chassidut, the Hasidic movement now known as Chabad, which was originally called Lubavitch. He got some of the ideas that he has in the Tanya, which is his main work of his life, although he wrote other books as well, which are equally fascinating, or if not more in a way, according to me. He got, you ask a Chabadnik, they would maybe not say that, but he got some of the ideas right from here. Those ideas are, so he uses some ideas from Shefatal, and he weaves them in, I think precisely because he knew what a popular book this is, at least that's part, and also because the ideas in here are seminal. I mean, this is, you know, we know about the Shnei Luchot Habrit, which is another classic Kabbalistic work, which has been translated. How do you say that? The two statements of the covenant, or whatever that's called. It's also Horowitz.
What's it called again?
It's called Shnei Luchot Habrit.
And who wrote that? That's okay.
It's so sad I can't remember it. But they were cousins. Shefatal
and he and the Alter Rebbe.
No, the author of the Shnei Luchot Habrit, which is around the same time. She's called the Shlah. He's just called by his book. You know?
They all are. That's how they get
the
known.
Holy Shlah.
So this is a guy who was a cousin of the author of the Shefatal.
Yeah, they were cousins.
And when was that?
That's in I think that's the late 15th century, or either, I think that's late 16th century. I'm sorry.
16th, the 15th.
Yeah. So this also is like right around the time of the Arizal.
About the Tanya, that was like right around what, 1800?
Somewhere around 1800, 1810 something. And so these two authors, anyway, they were cousins. But like you said, it really was. I mean, Stan was exactly right. I mean, this was destroyed in the Holocaust. I mean, the people who studied this were murdered, and there's like, and so it remained because there was a group of very learned rabbis who, I know one of the sons of one of these rabbis, who went around and collected holy books, trying to find after the war, and they found quite a bit actually. So we didn't lose everything, but the understanding of it, the zeitgeist of it, the incorporation in daily life, and how to look at things. It's kind of an aside, but I always say that sadly, what was going on in Poland, especially in Warsaw, there was a very, very kind of high form of spirituality, a very universal form of spirituality that was developing. And I always say that if the Holocaust hadn't happened, there would have been as many people going to Poland as there are or were going to India, because of the type of deep spirituality and universality that was developing there. And I think the Shefatal was, and hopefully will be again, key to reestablishing such a high vision of Judaism's kind of spiritual
Hey, Daniel, why do you think it
message.
hasn't been translated? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There isn't not again, the people who studied it are no longer around, and
but
those
can somebody
traditions.
do it today? I mean, can it be done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the more approachable books of Kabbalah, period.
Mm.
It's very approachable. He's very methodical, and it's huge. It's an enormous work. But the introduction alone is worth translating. I mean, the introduction is a great place to start, and it's a great place to finish. I mean, it is off the charts beautiful in how he reestablishes. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? Like,
Yeah.
he reestablishes God as all loving, all peaceful, and all compassionate.
Mm.
Period.
Wow.
Like, that's where our intention is supposed to be going. Period. End of story. But he does. Yeah, he also connects the entire alphabet to the hand. That's how the introduction starts.
Crazy.
Like, as Stan said many times, we have to translate this. We just need funding.
Well, folks, we need somebody to translate it, or either that, or we all have to learn Hebrew and be able to read it in its original language, which probably has.
And I think, learn Hebrew. You would have to be able to think in Hebrew. You would have to be able to
That's right.
understand the idiomatic references, which which the original sources of them are lost.
Right. That's
Yada
why
yada yada.
translation would have to have tons of footnotes.
Yeah.
But so we'll talk about that, I'm sure, more. It's just so fascinating. We could just do a series on trying to understand that. And the fact that it exists and so few people know about it is what's so amazing. And maybe we can be champions of that, as well as Stan's work, and Daniel, you have brought it up many times, and keep doing it, because we need to know that Stan didn't just pop this up from, we talk about the ancient world, but we don't have to go back that far, to see the references. Yes, Lilana.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that even this really fairly early poster, that it's so logical and so structured, and that he did this by taking what materials he could access. And believe me, by this time, 1990, we were not directly in touch with people like Daniel who were familiar with the sources. This was still before we moved back east to a Jewish community. That Stanley was able to deduce all of this in a structured manner is an indication that this material is there and structured perhaps in such a way so that it could be rediscovered by, in a sense, a naive person. And not that I'm calling Stanley naive as a human being, but in terms of his knowledge base, it was mathematics, it was logic, it was, to a certain degree, spirituality, in that he researched as many different spiritual traditions in terms of their books. He, as one of the earlier tapes said, that he had this, he read everything, including even things written in green ink, and came to the conclusion that they all seemed to be talking about the same thing, but no one was saying what it was. And at that point, his logic function stepped in and said, well, okay, how can I organize this? The fact that what he came up with in this area, when he was naive about Jewish tradition, he didn't really know. And that Daniel, who does know, and part of your life, Daniel, has been studying this stuff and learning from it and applying it in your own life, can go to this early thing and recognize it and say, yes, this is what's there. that's something to pay attention to, both about Stan's work and about the material itself that he was looking at, about what's actually important about when you really deeply get into a study of even just Genesis, which is where he was focused at the moment, or just the letters, that this information is there if you know how to access it, and that knowledge doesn't have to be taught from a teacher above. It needs to be a part of your direction and focus you really want to find out, and you can apply standards of impeccability to what you are thinking to see the structure that lies underneath. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. And so that's what we're looking at today. And we're trying to follow his path of thinking in terms of coming up with these meanings. In terms, yeah, go ahead.
Another important point.
Yeah,
Part of the point of what I'm trying to say is that it's not Stanley, yes, Stanley did this work, but the work is available if you have the right tools, not of external learning, but if you have the right tools of discernment and persistence, that it's there and other people can do it too.
Yeah, I mean, also his part of his methodology was, I would say, almost a brutally formal rejection of anything not truthful.
Mhm.
I mean, just, it was like there was no room for anything else. And if he sensed any kind of not truth in his own work or in anyone else's, he immediately denoted it. Oh, maybe this is not right, And I think that's also an essential thing. He had this incredible brain and soul and ability to analyze, but he also just had this unbelievable sense of truth. And I think that's, again, like, it's also being totally truthful with himself about his work.
right.
And I think that's a great thing. Great to know someone like that, but also just in terms of people who want to dig into this, do not think that you could fool yourself.
Right. Well, that's why he wanted to use the scientific method, in terms of, as he described it, finding fault, chipping away, finding what didn't work. And I think his motivation is if he didn't do it, somebody else would. And, and he was very aware of the potential criticism that he would get, if he didn't, what did he say, dot his I's and cross his T's. And so that's why that was so important to him in developing this work. So let's continue with this analysis. And again, we're looking at the relationships between these letters to get the full meaning, because eventually his thesis is based on the idea of a universal language and the ability to express that or understand it. So that's why the meanings are essential, and that they have to be universal meanings, operational meanings. So let's continue with that.
Level, we have the idea or distinction between inside and outside applied to taking something in. That's what our matrix, our model says it should be. Well, it's the letter kuf, kaf, I'm sorry. Kuf is the other one. Kaf. And it is pronounced in Hebrew as a K, as a KH, or as a CH, depending on how it's pointed and how it's voweled. It means literally, the word kaf is the Hebrew word that is translated as palm, as in palm of the hand. And as a prefix, it means as, or like, or as that, or like that. Something of that sort. And as a palm, you see, if you come over to the left-hand side and look at the English cognates of the KP letter, it's the K letter followed by the P, would be the K, the hard C sound, cup, or cuff, or in its KH or CH, hoof, hoof. Well, these are all ways, like a palm, of holding something. And a palm is what you use to pull something towards you, to hold on, to take in. And thus, cape, coop, cupping. Cupping gives a sense of nesting, which is why it means like or alike. To capture, to nest in, to box in, to hold, to parallel. Those are all senses of what the kaf, the K sound means. And remember, I'm saying that the letter K in English carries that meaning just as much as the letter kaf in Hebrew does, and likewise in other languages. And finally, in that level, we have the third member of the triad, and that is Resh. Beit, Kaf, Resh. Resh is at the end of the alphabet. Resh is pronounced as an R. It means a head. If we come over to the left side, there's our R. Resh is cognate to rush. It represents a ray, as it does in our geometric usage today. R is the radius, the ray coming out from a center, radiating away. In fact, the rushing, rise, ruse, ahead, radial motion, rushing out, commotion, to go out versus in, to be a radiator, is the opposite of to hold in. And so Beit says the distinction is between inside and outside. Kaf says take that thing in, and Resh says radiate it out.
So I just want to just review what he's talking about here. We were talking about the bait on the archetypal level. We're looking at the palm or the kaf on the inner spiritual level, and the resh on the outer physical level. And that seems to make sense. And again, it was what Stan called a logical matrix. And so while we were playing that, Daniel, I heard a lot of wows.
Yeah. Well, because I'm remembering how Chef Atal runs in his introduction, the kaf, the palm, the hand, is all throughout the introduction, and he actually references God as the kaf of compassion, the kaf of merit, and the kaf of peace. Kaf harachamim, kaf hazachut, kaf harachamim, and kaf hashalom. Sorry, wrong order. So meaning he references God, our understanding of God, not God is, but our ability to comprehend God as the hand, like directly. That's what he called in the introduction. So, and as a matter of fact, he starts out the entire introduction, I think I mentioned before, with the concept of the hand, and there's a pasuk, and he's relating the hand, but then it goes on to explain the hand, actually. To explain, he goes on to explain, it probably is true when he says kaf, he doesn't just mean the palm, he means the entire structure, because the introduction also, which is true, it can be like kaf yad is like it's your hand. Kaf can be hand. It also can mean specifically palm, but it's really hand. And he goes on to elucidate the 14 bones in the fingers, as the priestly blessing, as being the 28 when the hands are put together, as being 28 bones, which is related to the 28 letters of Breshit, which is related to God as the hand of peace, the hand of merit, and the hand of compassion, and also the Kaddish prayer, the Yehei Shmei Rabbah, as I think it has 28 letters. And he relates all those things together. And so it's like, again, it's like, I'm just remembering all this. It's been a while since I actually opened that book.
I bet you open it again right when we're finished.
I was going to go run and get it, because it's like, so I'm looking at this just going, it's just, the connection is, it's almost explicit. I mean, again, like he's referencing the hand and the reconception of God as universally loving and compassionate and positive, with the hand and with the function of the hands, and then later in the book with how the letters function in this exact way. And it's also the first place, I think, in Europe or in the world, I think, that in Jewish literature the hand was printed. it's in the book, a drawing of the hands of the priestly blessing. So it's just, yeah, again, I just,
Yeah, that's a, if you think of the kaf as, the inner layer, inner spiritual layer, then the idea of its being the holder of peace, the whatever you were saying, makes perfect sense, because that's the way in which, if we are so inclined, we can feel this connection with oneness, this connection with universality. We feel it as an inward thing, like that. And yeah, I just want to point out to people who actually have our book, The Alphabet That Changed the World, there is a couple of pages on pages 230 to 231, which actually goes through the Bet, Kaf, Resh sequence, and says similar things to what was said on that video, but that again, I'm really glad that you found that video, because I'm finding it extraordinary. There's connections there that I had either forgotten or just internalized so deeply that hearing them being made explicitly is really helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting that bait as the archetype of inside and outside, and then we have the inner being the palm and the outer being the head or rushing out. It just fits right into that, and probably all the different levels are doing that. I'm not going to cover all of them, but yeah, Adele.
Yeah, when the shape, the actual form, the spiral hand model is in the hands, the embodiment, of the fact that the palm extends into the fingers, that the shape is the palm, but it's all of it. And this is cuff, and the palms face out. And now hearing what you've said, I always thought about it as a receptor, like I'm open to receiving. So I'm opening to receiving inwardly, like my inwardness is refreshed with cuff. It's like I'm bringing in these concepts of, love, compassion, peace, like whatever it is I'm taking in. And it's also, it feels like I'm sending out, but I really feel like the inward meaning, it's more of a receptor. And then I remember Stan saying something like, it's like you're saying stop. And I think of that, like the cuff being a really strong sense of boundaries, of what I'm willing to take in, what I'm willing to give out. Like there's something about cuff that is an inward definition. We're defining our own self on the inside with a sense of maybe stop. When, half of the commandments are negative, thou shalt not. And so the idea of restraint or a stop or inhibition feels really central to Jewish wisdom and thought about the no.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is then go down to the Resh, completely rushing, radiating. Yeah, it's like the complete opposite. Well, not complete, but it's definitely another projection, and Resh is so powerful in terms of representing that in all the words in which it's used. So that's why it just seems to, just evolve into.
Can I read the little paragraph from the book?
Yeah, sure. And this is from the book?
Yeah, this is from our book on page 231.
Okay.
Okay. It says, in the dictionary, Resh is a head or a headwater. The name of the letter indicates what a head does: initiate, start, begin, and rush, graze, race, reach. These are all functions that are initiated in the headwaters of thought, the mind. They work by being projected into the world. Rash is another possible translingual pun for Raish. And in fact, he says an evil person is called a Rasha because they are rash and race after what their eyes behold. I was reading this paragraph cold, folks, and the last sentence introduces a whole bunch of other concepts, which if you are familiar with what it's talking about will make perfect sense, and which may upset you if you're not familiar with what it's talking about. Ignore the last sentence. It's really okay.
But then you take that same reshet, the woven network, that's part of Bereshit. And that was another important element of looking at Bereshit as a woven network.
Right, and there you get Beit, Beresh Beit, which is the first distinction, and the word reshet actually means woven network. So yeah.
So now there's another way of looking at the letter Beit and determining the relationships. There's the 3 letters that comprise the letter Beit: Beit, Yud, and Tav. And kind of the same exercise we were doing before could be applied here. In this case, we're looking at the Beit, the distinction between inside and outside. The Yud, which we didn't go into in detail, but we know it means hand, and obviously hand is an important element. And then Tav, as Levana, we talked earlier about that meaning kind of reflective. So we're kind of getting a similar definition here by just looking at those 3 letters also. I don't know if there's any, no, we don't want to get into Gamache yet, but if there's any other comments on those 3 letters, because I mean, obviously Yud is an extremely important letter. They're all extremely important, but it's significant in terms of being the bridge between Beit and Tav.
Yud means hand, but it also references consciousness very much so, and ideas, specifically kind of higher ideas or ideals. But it's kind of the combination of Yud can mean like consciousness and higher ideas or ideals or learning. It's not that but not learning, actual learning in concept. So if you have like housing, ideas or ideals or consciousness that reflects itself. So like what you do in a house is especially as a child, you learn to reflect you learn to kind of understand who you are a little bit. Your consciousness grows within this house, right? Consciousness grows, the house that begets consciousness, which then the person learns to become an individual through. I think that's how houses are. I mean, it gives a new meaning to the housing crisis. We have a spiritual housing crisis going on,
Right. Yeah, it's important to understand that we're talking about housing, the verb, not the noun, what a house represents, the contrast between inside and outside. So, in terms of human development, house inside is safe, protective. You go outside, it's, you encounter the world. It's also maybe the contrast between consciousness and ego. There could be a lot of ways of looking at that dichotomy. Anybody else have any comments on those 3 letters?
Just interesting that the tav is at the end of the word. It's the last letter of the alphabet. So we have the first distinction, and we have a sense of closure, perfection, kind of resting in an ending that isn't an ending, that's going to start again with Aleph all over again. So we're going to be going in and out of that house. There's some kind of a cycle with Tav being at the end. and with the hand and yud being somewhat central in the aleph bet. So there's something very
I like that. I like that.
beautiful.
Yeah, I like that. The beginning and end of the alphabet with the yud being the hand in between them. Yeah.
Right, maybe, even a reach of some sort, like pulling together within
Right.
this
I like that.
bite.
Yeah.
Usually
Right.
if you gesture it, you get a sense of it, that like there's sort of a breaking out and then there's a coming back to self. Yud is very, like Daniel says, consciousness, but it's also kind of it's self-referral. You're coming back to yourself,
Mhm.
back inward.
Well, what's a gesture for yud?
This.
Yes,
Oh, and then the tav.
as though I said me, mine. That's yud. So it's very coming back to me. So after this breakout of bet, which I can't do with the screen seeing me, yud, and then it just flips and it's top right against your chest, very I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just a
Let's
word.
let's take a look at Stan showing the hand gesture for bait.
Then bait means to break open, to birth. And so I've got my knees bending, baruch. My knees are bent, and my hands are open as if I'm birthing. And if you were to look in my left hand, you would be able, if we hold it just so, and again, I'll have to tip it some for the camera. If I can do it. No, I'm losing it here. Let's take the time to do it, though. I want to show you the Rashi Nachmanides bait, and you should be able to see it there. If you look at the table, you'll see that that looks very much like the Rashi Nachmanides bait shape. Okay. So we've got Aleph all, bait, birthing, breaking open, first distinction.
And again, this was an early work that kind of a studio version. He goes into each of the letters, and this was more to show how it looked in the hand model, showing the gesture, but then seeing the letter itself in the model, demonstrating the fact that the hand gesture correlated with the actual letter. And Bates a really good example of that. He used that several times. And it might be interesting to put together some kind of way of showing these combinations in hand gesture. In other words, the bait, yud, and tav, and see what that looks like. Yeah.
And Adele just did it.
Yeah, Adele just showed us what that looks like.
I was also thinking about the way he used bet, cuff, and what was the third letter? Resh. Yeah, that's also interesting. First distinction moving out, and then this kind of receptive place, and then throwing it right up and out, radiating from the head, which is Resh. So that's also beautiful. I mean, anytime you gesture three letters together, you also have the opportunity to repeat it. So from Resh, bet will tumble right down. And so you start to get like a whole new thing as you look at all of the transitions between the letters. And that
Something that Stan was most
more
interested
inner droshes, as you do
Yeah.
them, you get ideas of how the letters are speaking to us and how all of the many definitions are there, but one of them will just kind of come forward as being, in this moment, that's what it's meaning to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that people who watching this and who have watched this series are seeing that there is a lot of potential here in terms of understanding a universal language that in terms of the combinations that Adele's talking about, where you could perhaps go through the text of Genesis in hand gesture and get some meaning from that, or the combination of letters. If you go through each of the letters, and put those, usually there's 3, sometimes 2 letters that comprise the letter, 2 letters that comprise the letter. I guess that makes sense. But the deeper meaning, and nobody's doing this work. Nobody's even looking at it. It's like everything is stopped. There was a lot of information that came out in terms of a lot of books on the Hebrew alphabet, tons of scholarly books. If you look in them, you'll see variations on the meanings. Not all of them agree. Some of them emphasize other things. Some are done for artistic purposes. So those are all out there, and maybe people are still doing it, but it's just repeating the same thing. And it's all kind of on a surface level. We're not getting into these deeper universal meanings, because if it just means something to one group, what purpose does that serve? How are we serving? Where's the tikkun olam in that? So all I can say is that there's, Stan left us with more questions than answers, and the potential to move forward years and years of just redacting this. And as Daniel put it on the video that I posted, we are now making a connection to the ancient world, which is not all about just the history and the way customs of knowledge that was pure and deep and useful to us in our current situation in which we live.
I just wanted to point out one thing that occurred to me when I watched that video just now,
Sure.
that when he did Bet, he bent his knees and he had his whole body in it. And I've really explored each letter as to, how do we carry the body into the gesture, and how do we oppose the gesture, the weight of our hands, the draw of our spine, our feet on the ground, head up. Just, it makes the gestures less a hand and wrist activity, but an awareness of the whole body. Talk about the sphirot being in our bodies. There's a sense that we're truly embodying the gestures when we involve the body as a whole. And it was just really exciting to see that, because I had added things like that, not realizing that he was already thinking about those things.
Right.
He was creating the gestures. He
Definitely.
felt embodied. He did not just feel like, oh, because it's sitting in my hand, I feel embodied. It was the whole body working.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Am I right,
I know that you mentioned the transitions between the letters, and that was something that he was very much interested in exploring and looking at. He felt that those were very important. But as I've said several times in this series, he was not a physical body person. I mean, the thing about Baruch, or about it, just the Beit, you think about it, and if you're standing up, that's kind of an obvious thing to do when you start thinking about it. But that was like as far as he got in terms of body, because he wasn't a body person. So, I'm delighted to hear and see what you've been able to explore with those, the kinds of meanings that you get from moving your whole body in a way that's both practiced and knowledgeable, since that's your field. And so, like I was talking about, Stanley bringing the expertise of his fields of thinking and logic and observation, you're bringing the expertise of your field in terms of knowledge of how the body works and how it affects your emotions, and all of that, both from your physical therapy point of view and from your choreography and dancing point of view. That is also an expertise that you bring to the field of our knowledge. So I'm very grateful for that, and so was he.
Yeah, we should think that way. And we talk about hand gestures, but obviously it's much more. we're not just our hands, we're holistic people.
Well,
And
yeah.
go ahead, Jay.
No, I was gonna say, I think it also, what's interesting about it is, again, this goes back to the Chef Fatal and his 16th century reformulation of God in a way, or how we understand God or approach God. This material really is at its core very solid and unchanging, but it's not dogmatic in its expression. So Stan, being not a body person, he did move his body, but it wasn't normal to do it when he gestured. And that worked pretty well for him in terms of this material. And so it's and Friedel, who is very much a body person and does such important work in the world of dance and therapy, it's extremely important and relevant. And so and that's how, like you mentioned, like when you're gesturing these things, these ideas come, and that's what's the most beautiful things about this work, is that it allows you to connect to meaning, and to specifically the meaning of Hebrew and Hebrew letters in a way that is entirely your own, and at the same time entirely authentic to the tradition.
And if you want a connection to the ancient world, you can review the legends of King David dancing the Torah. And so yeah, we're opening up a whole new way of, not only in terms of this, but in terms of as a species, the fact that we've become brainiacs, everything's based on our mind, that's reality for us. But those of us who are in the consciousness raising business, and the four of us, I think, are in that, know that it's holistic, it's a whole body, and it's not, so in terms of expressing this work, we should always keep that in mind. Where, as Lavana said, Stan was focused on the hand gestures, but he just demonstrated himself that there's more to it.
Yeah, and I would just add one phrase after Daniel's, which is not only, matches this incredible Jewish wisdom that is our heritage of the four of us sitting here, but it's also universal. Just these ideas and these messages, they're redundant with many of the great traditions, and they're certainly redundant with anybody who wanted to look inward.
That's right.
We look inward.
We
come right into our breath. We come right into insights, and every time you get an insight, that's healing, and it's
human. It's not human. It doesn't belong to any one.
Exactly. So I think that especially the gestural work is just magnificent. Just opens up humanness.
Exactly. Well, we'll explore this more. I think that I was thinking, well, we'll just go into these two levels, but I don't know. I kind of think we're getting a lot out of going into this alphabet, going into it. So I think we should just continue. Yeah, no, we're getting so much out of it. So whether you folks at home are or not, we are. So we're having a great time here.
Yeah, if you want to watch four people enjoying themselves, or five,
here it is. Here it is. But
go for it. Watch the videos.
Yeah, exactly. But we've kind of run out of time today. So just once again, we thank you for watching, and we look forward to future programs. So take care. Have a great time. Bye-bye.